Okay, guys, let's get started with this. Some people missing, but we got to get to it. We got to get to it. So yesterday we looked at all the different political systems that kind of led to World War II. Now we're going to do something very similar to what we did when we did World War I. If you guys remember when we did World War I, we did a day where we just kind of looked at the sides, we kind of looked at the leaders, we kind of looked at the countries that are participating in World War II, so we have like a better understanding on, who's on what side, so to speak. So we're gonna do the same thing. So it's very simple. We have a reading. We're gonna do the reading together. It's gonna take like 5-10 minutes. Then you guys are going to take the rest of the period to be working on the multiple choice questions that go along with it. Now, if you see me sharing my screen, you should notice pretty long reading. And there are a lot of questions. Okay, there are a lot of questions, 40 questions. Okay, it seems like a lot, but it's really not. A lot of it's true, false. A lot of it's one-word answers. A lot of it's you're just like putting like literally allied or axis. Like it's not going to take you long. I promise you. It looks a lot more than it is. All right, so let's do this reading together and get a better sense of what's going on. Okay, we can't really go forward when you guys get back from break getting into World War II if you don't really know who's on what side. So I hope you guys really pay attention and follow along closely with this. Okay? So World War II was fought between two major groups of nations that became known as the Axis and the Allied powers. Okay? If you remember, World War I was fought between the Central and Allied powers. So now we're going to have just a slight switch. Okay? The Central powers are going to change their names to the Axis powers. And the Allied powers are going to keep their names the same for the most part. Okay, so let's take a look. So let's first start with the Allied powers. The major Allied powers are Britain, France, Russia, and the United States. Now, I want to say this right from the get-go. The reading is going to call them Russia. They are not Russia. Okay, their actual name right now is the Soviet Union. Okay, so I'm going to make that abundantly clear. It's like a mistake that the reading makes. Okay, Russia does not exist in 1930, 1940. It's the Soviet Union. Okay, because they changed their government to communism. They changed the name of their country. All right, so know that the reading makes a mistake. The Allies formed mostly as a defense against attacks from the Axis powers. Britain, France, and Poland were the original members of the Allied powers. Okay, after Germany invaded Poland, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany, okay, which we'll learn about. Britain, Russia, and the United States were sometimes called the Big Three. When China joined, they were known as the Four Policemen. They were the ones who later founded something called the United Nations, which we'll learn about at the end of World War II. Russia, I should say, the Soviet Union and Germany were friends at the start of World War II, which is really, really interesting. Okay, even though the Soviet Union does become an Allied power. However, on June 22nd, 1941, Germany's leader, ordered a surprise attack on the Soviet Union. Okay, Hitler had gone back on something called the Nazi-Soviet Pact that had formally been made, saying that Germany and Russia would not attack one for another 10 years. This surprise attack caused Russia to become an enemy of the Axis power and join the Allied powers. So the Soviet Union joined this war late. The United States joined this war late. Okay, they were not the original Allied powers. Like World War I, the United States had hoped to remain neutral during World War II. Unfortunately, the United States was caught by surprise when they were attacked by surprise at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. We will learn all about that later on after break. This attack united our country against the Axis powers and turned the tide of World War II in favor of the Allied countries. Okay, so now we have the leaders of the Allied powers. Let's first start with Winston Churchill. He was the leader of Great Britain at the time. He's one of Britain's most famous leaders. He was the prime minister of Great Britain, kind of like our president, during most of World War II. His country was the last fighting the Germans in Europe, known for famous speeches to his people when the Germans were bombing them. He was a very inspirational leader towards a lot of British people. We'll talk about how impactful he is after break. Our president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, considered one of the greatest presidents in the history of the United States, led the country out of the Great Depression and through World War II. Okay, so we'll talk about him a lot more. Joseph Stalin, not to get too much into him right now, we will later. He was the leader of the Soviet Union, and he was the general secretary of the Communist Party. He was a dictator. Okay, we should remember yesterday, dictator is someone with full authority over his country, and Joseph Stalin was one of those. He led the Soviet Union through terrible and devastating battles with Germany. Millions, not thousands, millions died from this. After winning the war, he set up something called the Eastern Bloc of Soviet-led communist states. So he is the leader for the Soviet Union. Very, very, I'll be honest, ruthless guy. But he was on our side during World War II. Charles de Gaulle, he was the leader of France. He later the Free French. He led the French resistance movement against Germany. Okay, so these are your major leaders. I would say Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill are the ones we need to know, though, because they just come up a bunch. Okay, Poland and China were also a part of the Allied powers. Poland was first invaded by Germany in 1939, which officially started World War II. We'll talk more about it after break. China was invaded by Japan in 1937. They became a member of the Allies after the attack on Pearl Harbor in the United States in 1941. I want to make this clear again. Remember, a world war is multiple countries fighting multiple countries. So you have a lot of countries and a lot of leaders. I know it's tough to follow at times. Other allied nations were Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the Netherlands, Yugoslavia, Belgium, and Greece. There were even more countries that were on the allied side, mostly because they were taken over, attacked by the allied Axis nations. All right, so you see, it's not just these 4 countries. There's like 15, 16 of them. There's a lot of allied countries. You don't need to know all of them, just the 4 major ones. All right, now let's look at the Axis powers. Okay, this is the other side, the quote-unquote bad guys of World War II. The major Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan. The alliance of the Axis powers began to form in 1936. On October 15, 1936, Germany and Italy signed a friendship agreement that formed the Rome-Berlin Axis. After this treaty, the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini used the term Axis to refer to their alliance. On November 25, 1936, Japan and Germany signed the Anti-Comintern Pact, which was a treaty against communism. On May 22, 1939, a lot of dates, don't worry about them. On May 22, 1939, a stronger alliance called the Pact of Steel was created. The name of this was originally the Pact of Blood, but changed because they thought the public might not like it. Yeah, when you say blood, it sounds a little threatening. This was later called the Tripartite Pact when Japan signed it on September 27, 1940. All right. We have our leaders here. Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Emperor Hirohito. Those are the 3 major people. So let's start with the most famous. And many of you people already know who he is. This is Adolf Hitler. Hitler was known as the Chancellor of Germany. He started in 1933 and later became the Führer, or the dictator, in 1934. He was a ruthless dictator who specifically hated Jewish people and pretty much anyone who was not known of the Aryan race, which we'll talk about more. And he wanted to purge or get rid of, in Germany, any person who was considered a weak or inferior race. Okay, so anyone who is not basically a white guy who had blonde hair and blue eyes, he wanted to get rid of. He thought they were a weak and inferior race, where a place like the United States, there's a lot more diversity, not in Germany at this time. And he also wanted to control all of Europe, and some would even say the world. Okay. Benito Mussolini, he was from Italy. He was a very similar person to Hitler, not quite as famous. He was the supreme dictator of Italy, and he was called the Duce, or the leader. He founded the concept of fascism back in the 1920s that actually Adolf Hitler ended up following. We learned fascism yesterday, where one leader and one party has total power, total control. They make all of the decisions in the country. There's no freedom, right? There's no democracy. Okay, they are the full-time leaders. And he inspired Adolf Hitler. Emperor Hirohito. Now, Japan's confusing because Japan is a fascist country, but they don't have like a central leader necessarily. They have Emperor Hirohito. I just want to get the guy's name correctly. Give me 1 second. So, I want to make sure I get his name correctly. Okay, the guy's name is also Shigenori Togo. I know him by last name Togo. I couldn't remember the first name, or sometimes known as like that. He is sometimes considered the leader of World War II for Japan. But for this reading, we'll look at his Emperor Hirohito. So Hirohito remained the Emperor of Japan after the war. The first time his subjects heard his voice was when he announced the surrender of Japan on the radio. So like no one really knew who he was, but he was like the leader. He was a very quiet guy though. So he's a lot different than like Hitler and Mussolini, who were a lot more in your face. Other members of the Axis powers were Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and Finland. Hungary became the fourth member of what's known as the Tripartite Pact. They played a huge role in the invasion of the Soviet Union. Bulgaria started out on the Axis side of the war, but ended up in a situation to Bulgaria. They started on the Axis powers and helped to invade the Soviet Union. By the end of the war, they had changed sides and fought for the Allies. Finland never signed the Tripartite Pact, but fought with the Axis powers against the Soviet Union. Okay, so this assignment, you're going to go back to a lot of the things in the reading. So there's a lot of things that have to go on here. Okay, so first you have to identify. So you have 8 words here. You have to put the proper name in the box. Okay, this will all be done. I just want to show you on your Google Doc that I shared. It's all kind of nicely set up for you here. You have the fill in the blank. You have a true, false. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, there's a total of 40 questions. I think everything will be straightforward, except maybe 21 through 25, which I gave you an example for. So let's go to 21. When you get to the one that says odd one out, you basically want to tell me which one of these 4 choices doesn't belong with the others. So in this case, you have Germany, Poland, Italy, Japan. So we know from the reading that Germany, Italy, and Japan are Axis powers. We would know that Poland from the reading is an allied power. So if you look at the way I did it is I wrote the name Poland, and then I basically said Poland does not belong because it's the only allied power country where Italy, Japan, and Germany are all Axis powers. So I explained that. That might be the only tricky thing to do. I think everything else is pretty straightforward. All right, so for the rest of class, you guys got plenty of time. You're working on all this. I suspect most of you will not finish, and that's okay. There is no work over spring break, so you could obviously just finish it up then. And then, yeah, that's it. Just make sure you're all caught up with the work when you get back. All right, it's 9:30, so let me stop the recording because this is just specifically for you guys.